Pizzaverse Studios presents The Ego Detector TM. Ever walk into a room and wonder, who's going to spend the next 2 hours telling me how important they are? Now there's a solution. Introducing the Ego Detector, the world's first totally fictional device engineered to detect dangerous levels of self-importance before anyone says, "Let me tell you who I know." Just point. Scan. And watch the meter climb. I'm the toughest guy in the neighborhood. Beep, beep, beep. Moderate ego detected. Nobody can touch me. Beep, 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 ep. Warning, reality may be approaching at high speed. The rules don't apply to me. Red lights flashing. Critical levels of main character syndrome detected. Please step away from the microphone. But wait. Order today and we'll include our Reality Check TM Pocket Calendar absolutely free. It features handy reminders like, federal investigations take time. Evidence doesn't care about your reputation. And court records have a much better memory than you do. Still not convinced? Listen to these satisfied customers. Dum chikale. I thought I was untouchable. Turns out I was very touchable. Sammy the Bullman, Gwaya did turn. I ignored the ego detector. Now my lawyer owns a bigger house than I do. Operators are standing by. Actually, no, they're not. Because this product doesn't exist. Unlike consequences. The Ego Detector TM. Because confidence is free. But overconfidence can get very expensive. Pizzaverse Studios. We don't sell fantasies. We investigate them.
Analyzing Evil, Gene Borrello. Violence, Ego, Cooperation, and the Cost of the Life. A Pizzaverse Studios documentary. A Palermo Productions original. Written by Bambi Palermo. Narrated by Vincent DiPrio. Research compiled from publicly available court records, news reporting, interviews, and other documented sources. This documentary examines allegations, convictions, public statements, and historical events as reflected in those sources.
Every criminal story eventually reaches a crossroads. Some people disappear quietly. Some spend decades trying to rebuild their lives. Others never seem capable of escaping the very chaos they claim to have left behind. Today's story is about Gene Borrello, a man whose public image has transformed repeatedly over the years. Street criminal, Bonanno associate, government witness, podcaster, motivational speaker, internet personality. On paper, those are very different lives. But beneath each version sits the same question. Can someone truly leave violence behind if conflict remains the center of everything they do? According to court records and publicly documented reporting, Borrello participated in a violent burglary crew before later cooperating with federal authorities in cases involving members of the Bonanno crime family. Following his release from prison, he built a media career discussing organized crime, yet later faced additional legal trouble after authorities alleged he made violent threats toward his former girlfriend and her family. That's where this documentary begins. Not with internet drama. Not with YouTube personalities. Not with who's winning today's argument. We're going to rewind the clock and examine how repeated decisions, unchecked ego, and a willingness to embrace violence created a pattern that followed him from the street into the courtroom, and eventually onto the internet. Because sometimes the most dangerous prison isn't made of steel. Sometimes it's built from your own decisions. This is Analyzing Evil.
Darkness doesn't usually arrive wearing a mask. More often, it shows up wearing confidence. It tells you you're the smartest guy in the room. It convinces you that every rule is for someone else. It whispers that you're untouchable. Until one day, the paperwork says otherwise. Welcome back to Analyzing Evil, the series where we examine the psychology, documented history, and real-world consequences behind some of the most controversial figures connected to organized crime. Today's story isn't about Hollywood. There are no orchestral montages, no slow-motion walk into the sunset, no glamorous version of the life. Instead, this is the story of a man whose journey moved from the streets to federal court to internet notoriety. A story where violence, reputation, loyalty, cooperation, ego, and reinvention collide. Over the next several chapters, we're going to examine the publicly documented record surrounding Gene Borrello. Court records, news reporting, public interviews, his own statements, the words of investigators, the timeline that exists on paper, not the mythology that grows online. Because the internet has a funny way of turning complicated histories into simple slogans. Hero, villain, rat, legend. Those labels make for entertaining comment sections. Reality is usually far messier. This documentary isn't about cheering for anyone. It isn't about settling scores. And it certainly isn't about glorifying organized crime. It's about asking a harder question. What happens when a life built around violence and status collides with consequences? Can someone truly reinvent themselves? Or does the past keep collecting interest until the bill finally comes due? As always, we'll separate documented fact from opinion, acknowledge where accounts differ, and let the record speak for itself. Because in the end, reputation can be manufactured. Legends can be exaggerated. But history has a habit of leaving receipts. And today, we're examining Gene Borrello. Howard Beach, where the story began. Every story has an address. Not because the address explains everything, but because it explains where the road started. For Gene Borrello, that road began in Howard Beach, Queens, New York. A neighborhood with a long and complicated history, one that has often been associated in the public imagination with organized crime, loyalty, reputation, and old-school street culture. Growing up in that environment didn't guarantee a particular future. Thousands of people built honest lives there. But for some, the mythology surrounding the life became more attractive than the reality. Movies made it look glamorous. Stories made it sound honorable. The street had a way of convincing young men that respect could be earned through intimidation instead of character. That illusion has trapped more than a few people over the decades. As Gene Borrello has publicly discussed in interviews, he became involved in criminal activity while he was still young. Eventually, according to court records and reporting, he associated with members and associates connected to the Bonanno crime family and became involved with a violent burglary crew that targeted homes, businesses, and victims believed to have cash or valuables. Real smart. Risk years of your life for money that disappears almost as fast as it arrives. It's a business model with a spectacularly bad retirement plan. Violence has a way of creating momentum. Once it becomes a tool, it has a habit of becoming the answer to every problem. Need money? Use violence. Need respect? Use violence. Someone insults you? Use violence. Eventually, the violence stops being a choice and starts becoming an identity. That's one of the recurring patterns we'll examine throughout this documentary. Not simply the crimes themselves, but the mindset that allows someone to believe every setback can be solved through intimidation, aggression, or force. Because organized crime doesn't just recruit people, it rewards certain ways of thinking. Pride over humility, impulse over patience, fear over respect. And when those values become your compass, every decision points toward another disaster. By the time federal investigators began unraveling the activities of Borrello and others connected to his crew, the mythology of the life had collided with something far less romantic. Evidence. Witnesses. Search warrants. Arrests. The fantasy was about to meet reality. And reality doesn't negotiate. Next, we'll examine how that criminal career escalated, why investigators focused on the burglary crew, and how a life built on intimidation began moving steadily toward a federal courtroom. The crew that thought they were untouchable. Every criminal enterprise has one thing in common. In the beginning, it always feels like it's working. Money starts coming in. Confidence starts growing. People begin believing they're smarter than everyone else. That's usually the exact moment everything starts falling apart. According to federal prosecutors and court records, Gene Borrello became part of a violent burglary crew associated with members and associates of the Bonanno crime family. The group was accused of targeting homes and businesses believed to contain cash, jewelry, and other valuables. The logic seemed simple. Find people who probably wouldn't call the police. Move fast. Take what you can. Repeat. Yeah. Real genius. Nothing says long-term career planning, quite like leaving behind victims, witnesses, and eventually a mountain of evidence for federal investigators to sort through. One of the biggest myths surrounding organized crime is that it's built on sophisticated masterminds playing three-dimensional chess. The reality is often much less glamorous. Greed. Impulsiveness. Poor planning, and the mistaken belief that getting away with something yesterday guarantees you'll get away with it tomorrow. That's a dangerous form of overconfidence. Psychologists sometimes describe this pattern as the illusion of invulnerability. After enough apparent successes, people begin believing the rules simply don't apply to them. Every close call reinforces the fantasy instead of serving as a warning. That mindset doesn't just encourage risk. It practically demands it. Bigger scores. Greater violence. More attention. Eventually, someone makes a mistake. Sometimes it's a loose conversation. Sometimes it's physical evidence. Sometimes it's electronic records. And sometimes it's simply the fact that law enforcement has been patiently assembling the puzzle while everyone else is celebrating another payday. The movies usually skip that part. They show the flashy entrance, They rarely show investigators spending months connecting phone records, surveillance, financial trails, and witness statements. Reality is slower. Reality is paperwork. And paperwork has ended more criminal careers than dramatic shootouts ever did. As investigators tightened their focus, the walls around the crew began closing in. The confidence that once fueled every decision was about to collide with something far less forgiving than street reputation: the federal justice system. Next, we'll examine the investigation, the arrests, and how the pressure of serious federal charges can change everything, including who stays loyal and who decides it's time to start talking. When the walls start closing in, there's an old saying in law enforcement: nobody thinks they're going to get caught until they do. For years, the crew operated with the confidence that comes from believing every successful score proved they were smarter than everyone else. But confidence isn't evidence. And federal investigators don't need Hollywood moments. They need time. According to publicly available court records and reporting, investigators spent years building cases involving violent crimes, robberies, extortion, racketeering, and other offenses connected to members and associates of the Bonanno crime family. While the people under investigation were living day to day, law enforcement was assembling timelines, comparing statements, analyzing evidence, interviewing witnesses, and building cases piece by piece. It's not flashy. It's not exciting. But it's incredibly effective. Meanwhile, the fantasy of being untouchable started cracking. Every arrest created another source of information. Every search warrant uncovered another lead. Every phone call had the potential to become another piece of evidence. It's amazing how quickly "we're all family" turns into "call my lawyer." That's one of the recurring themes you'll see throughout organized crime history. Loyalty often sounds absolute, right up until someone is facing decades in federal prison. Then the calculations begin. Who's really loyal? Who's protecting themselves? Who's hoping someone else takes the fall? Those aren't philosophical questions. They're survival questions. Federal prosecutions create extraordinary pressure. Long potential sentences, extensive evidence, and multiple defendants can fundamentally change the incentives for everyone involved. That pressure doesn't just test friendships. It tests identities. A man who spent years defining himself by toughness suddenly has to make decisions from inside a holding cell instead of a neighborhood social club. The street doesn't control the calendar anymore. The court does. The indictment does. The evidence does. For Gene Borrello, the investigation had reached the point where the choices were becoming fewer and the consequences were becoming much larger. The swagger that once defined life on the street was about to meet the cold arithmetic of federal prosecution. And that's where this story takes one of its most controversial turns. Because in the next chapter, we'll examine the decision that changed everything. The decision to cooperate. A choice that would permanently reshape his reputation, his future, and the way many people connected to organized crime would view his name. The decision that changed everything. There comes a moment in almost every organized crime case when mythology collides head-on with reality. The mythology says you'll never talk. Reality asks a much harder question. How many years are you willing to spend behind bars to prove it? Federal prosecutors had assembled a substantial case, and according to public court records, Gene Borrello ultimately entered into a cooperation agreement with the government. He later provided information and testimony in cases involving members and associates of the Bonanno crime family. Whether someone views that decision as pragmatic, inevitable, or a betrayal often depends on who's telling the story. Supporters argue that cooperating is a lawful choice that can help prosecute serious crimes and reduce violence. Critics, particularly within the culture of organized crime, view it as the ultimate violation of the code they claim to live by. Either way, it was a turning point that could never be undone. This is where the mythology of the life starts to unravel. For years, movies and street stories sell an image of unwavering loyalty. But when indictments arrive, the script changes. Suddenly, it's not about speeches. It's about sentencing guidelines. Not about reputation. About prison time. Amazing how fast all that tough guy talk runs into a calculator. Years become numbers. Numbers become negotiations. Negotiations become cooperation agreements. It's not cinematic. It's legal procedure. From a psychological standpoint, this is where survival often overtakes identity. The beliefs and persona that once defined someone are forced into direct conflict with the practical consequences of their choices. The result can be a complete reinvention, or a lifelong struggle between who someone was and who they now claim to be. For Gene Borrello, cooperating with the government closed one chapter of his life, but it opened another. Because once you're known publicly as a cooperator, that label doesn't disappear when the prison gates open. It follows you. It follows you. Into interviews. Into podcasts. Onto social media. Into every comment section. And into every future controversy. In the next part, we'll examine what happened after prison, how Gene Borrello reinvented himself as an online personality, and why the past continued to cast such a long shadow over the present. From the witness stand to the camera lens. Prison ends. A sentence ends. A cooperation agreement ends. Your reputation? That can follow you for the rest of your life. After his release, Gene Borrello entered a world that didn't exist when many traditional organized crime figures were coming up. The age of podcasts, YouTube, live streams, social media. A world where your past could become your business model. Former gangsters, former law enforcement officers, former prosecutors, former defense attorneys. Everyone suddenly had a microphone. And Gene Borrello grabbed one. He began appearing in interviews and podcasts discussing organized crime, his criminal past, and his experiences cooperating with federal authorities. His name became familiar to an entirely new audience that had never known him from the streets, only from the internet. It's one of the stranger twists of the modern era. Yesterday's courtroom witness becomes today's content creator. Yesterday's case file becomes today's thumbnail. Yesterday's headlines become tomorrow's live stream. Welcome to the attention economy. Here's where things get interesting. The internet rewards conflict. It rewards outrage. It rewards arguments. The louder the fight, the bigger the audience. The algorithm doesn't ask whether something is wise. It asks whether people will click. That creates a powerful incentive for people with controversial pasts to keep themselves in the spotlight. Sometimes that spotlight comes from telling their story. Sometimes it comes from arguing with critics. Sometimes it comes from creating another headline. The cycle feeds itself. From a psychological perspective, public attention can become reinforcing. Praise, criticism, interviews, reactions, and controversy all keep someone at the center of the conversation, even if much of that attention is negative. In other words, silence doesn't trend. Drama does. Real smart. If your goal is leaving your past behind, spending every day talking about it on camera is certainly one strategy. Whether viewers see redemption, accountability, entertainment, or contradiction depends largely on their own perspective. But one thing is undeniable. The internet gave Gene Borrello something that organized crime never could: a global audience. The question was whether that audience would witness reinvention or repetition. Because next, we'll examine the controversies and legal trouble that followed and ask whether old patterns had truly been left behind or were simply unfolding on a different stage. When old patterns refuse to die. One of the hardest questions in psychology is this: can someone truly change, or do they simply change the setting? A prison cell becomes a podcast studio, a street corner becomes a live stream. The audience changes, the technology changes. But if the underlying habits never change, history has a strange way of repeating itself. Following his release and growing online profile, Gene Borrello again found himself making headlines. Public reporting documented new legal troubles, including allegations involving threats and domestic violence-related offenses. Those allegations brought renewed scrutiny and fresh debate over whether his life had truly moved beyond the patterns of his past. As with any criminal case, allegations are distinct from convictions, and the outcome of legal proceedings should be understood on their own merits. For someone attempting to build a new public identity, that's a difficult position. Every new arrest, every new accusation, every courtroom appearance, every headline. They don't exist in isolation. They become part of a larger story the public is already watching. And that's the price of living a public life. Here's the irony. Many people spend years trying to escape the worst chapter of their lives. Then, through their own choices or the circumstances surrounding them, they end up giving that chapter a sequel. Real smart. It's like finally climbing out of a hole, then looking around and saying, "You know what? I miss digging." From a psychological standpoint, lasting change usually requires more than changing your environment. It often requires changing how you respond to conflict, stress, criticism, and frustration. If those underlying patterns remain intact, the scenery may be different. But the ending starts looking awfully familiar. This isn't unique to organized crime. It's a pattern seen across many forms of chronic criminal behavior. Identity becomes intertwined with conflict. Conflict brings attention. Attention reinforces identity. And around it goes. Whether Gene Borrello ultimately succeeds in putting that cycle behind him is something only time can answer. But the public record illustrates how difficult it can be to outrun a reputation once it has been built. Because in the next chapter, we're going to step back from the timeline and examine something even more important than the events themselves: the psychology, the role of ego, status, impulsivity, and the pursuit of respect that so often fuels lives of violence long before the first arrest ever appears on a court docket. The psychology of ego. What makes someone keep choosing conflict, even after they've seen where it leads? That's the question at the heart of this documentary. It's tempting to believe the answer is money. Sometimes it is, but in many cases, money eventually becomes secondary. The real currency is status, respect, fear, recognition, being the loudest voice in the room, being the toughest guy in the room, being the one everyone talks about. Psychologists have long recognized that repeated reinforcement can shape behavior. If aggression, intimidation, or risk-taking repeatedly produce rewards such as money, admiration from peers, or a sense of power, those behaviors can become deeply ingrained. Changing that pattern often requires far more than simply changing jobs or moving to a different environment. That's why some people leave crime behind, and others keep orbiting it. The neighborhood changes. The platform changes. The audience changes. But the need for attention, the need to win every argument, the need to always be the main character, that can remain remarkably persistent. Here's something the movies almost never show. Organized crime doesn't just damage victims. It damages the people living inside it. Every disagreement becomes a challenge. Every criticism becomes a personal attack. Every insult demands a response. Life becomes exhausting, real smart. Imagine carrying every internet comment around like it's a federal emergency. That's not strength, that's letting strangers rent space in your head for free. The strongest people often have one skill that gets overlooked. They know when not to fight. They know when to walk away. They know that self-control is often more powerful than intimidation. That lesson is difficult to learn when you've spent years in an environment where backing down is seen as weakness. In the end, the most revealing question isn't whether someone once lived a violent life. It's whether they've developed a fundamentally different way of thinking. Because real change isn't measured by what someone says in front of a camera. It's measured by the choices they make when nobody's applauding. And that brings us to the final question. After everything that's happened, after the crimes, the cooperation, the publicity, the controversies, what verdict should history ultimately reach? That's where we end this story. Every file eventually closes. Every courtroom empties. Every headline fades. But the lessons remain. Organized crime has always sold the same fantasy. Easy money. Easy respect. Easy power. History tells a different story. Broken families. Long prison sentences. Victims who rarely get remembered. And people who spend years trying to outrun decisions they made in moments. If this documentary accomplished anything, I hope it reminded you that we don't need to glamorize crime to understand it. We study it. We question it. We learn from it. Because the goal isn't to celebrate the past. The goal is to understand why it happened and why it keeps happening. Thank you for spending your time with us. This has been Analyzing Evil. Until next time, take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. And remember, history leaves fingerprints. If you're willing to look closely enough, it'll tell you exactly what happened. If you enjoyed this documentary and want more deep dives into organized crime, true crime, forgotten history, psychology, folklore, and the stories Hollywood never tells, you're in the right place. Hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new investigation. Join thousands of members of the Pizzaverse, where we don't rewrite history. We excavate it. Every week we dig through court records, historical documents, newspaper archives, and credible reporting to separate fact from fiction and myth from reality. No hero worship. No fairy tales. Just history, psychology, and the evidence. Welcome to the family. Welcome to the Pizzaverse. To every member of the Pizzaverse, thank you. Whether you've been here since the beginning or you just found this channel today, your support makes every documentary possible. Every view, every comment, every share, every conversation. It all helps keep independent storytelling alive. Thank you for believing in thoughtful research, respectful discussion, and the pursuit of truth over mythology. From all of us at Pizzaverse Studios and Palermo Productions, thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next documentary. Until then, stay curious. Stay kind. And never stop asking questions.
What's up, buddy? Would you like to get your fucking head blown off in broad daylight and I'll spit on your corpse afterwards? Would you like that?
There are men whose names become legends. And there are men whose names become warnings. For decades, he stood at the right hand of power, trusted, feared, respected, until one decision changed the history of organized crime forever. A man who admitted to taking part in 19 murders. A man who helped build one of America's most powerful criminal organizations. A man who ultimately helped bring it crashing down. But this isn't a story about glory. It's a story about psychology, about loyalty, ambition, ego, fear, and the moment survival became more important than the oath. What transforms a neighborhood kid from Brooklyn into one of the most feared figures in organized crime? What convinces an underboss to cooperate against the very world that made him? And after the courtroom, after witness protection, after prison, who is left when the legend finally disappears? This documentary isn't interested in myths. We're interested in evidence, in choices, in consequences. Every murder leaves a family. Every betrayal leaves a scar. Every decision sends ripples that never truly disappear. We'll examine the rise, the violence, the power, the testimony, the aftermath, and the psychology of a man whose life continues to divide opinions decades later. No worship. No fairy tales. No Hollywood smoke. Just the record. And the uncomfortable questions it leaves behind. one man, one organization, one decision that changed organized crime forever. Analyzing Evil, Sammy, the Bull, Gravano. Coming soon. Only on Pizzaverse Studios. Because history isn't here to flatter anyone.
How'd that cross necklace get over your horns? You know the saying, I bet you be sweating like a whore in church. Spending too much time, try to hide behind the Bible. Get in front of it, find out that Jesus was a foreigner. Virgin Mary, you would've deported her. Not before your husband found out she was a minor, he'd have ordered her. Him and his buddies would've recorded her, transported her, extorted her, and then sent her to the coroner. You don't get to pray for me. You won't bless your heart out of this one. I know that your hate runs deep. God is probably tired of getting name dropped by fake Christians. You don't get to pray for me. You won't bless your heart out of this one. I know that your hate runs deep. God is probably tired of getting name dropped by fake Christians. I'm pretty sure that God's annoyed of racists bringing him up. Sick of you chumps showing up to take a sip of the cup. You called the Aztec savages, but the cup, isn't it blood? Isn't the stuff symbolic? Oh, it's different, huh? Introduction to blood sacrifice. He died so you can commit your crimes. Here's the hoping he come back to life. I can't wait to see the face on every single preacher's wife. All them secrets you've been keeping, tell me how you sleep at night. All them evil things you feeling, don't leave cause you be polite. The deceiving and the thieving ain't concealed as recondite. Only a few people know. And you know why they keep it tight. You don't get to pray for me. You won't bless your heart out of this one. I know that your hate runs deep. God is probably tired of getting name dropped by fake Christians. You don't get to pray for me. You won't bless your heart out of this one. I know that your hate runs deep. God is probably tired of getting name dropped by fake Christians. Weaponized all of it, don't know what a proverb is. Cherry picking Bible scripts, oh my God. Arrogance, lying in the Lord names ain't honoring. Pride leading the blind again, oh my God. You must be drunk off the blood of Christ. Or maybe you just back hitting the hooch again. Or back to cosplaying a hooligan. The grift across to get the dollars like what? Now you forgot where you in your hoochie been? You don't get to pray for me. You won't bless your heart out of this one. I know that your hate runs deep. God is probably tired of getting name dropped by fake Christians. You don't get to pray for me. You won't bless your heart out of this one. I know that your hate runs deep. God is probably tired of getting name dropped by fake Christians.